Okay, so today, when I prepared this lecture, I bought a nice book which is called Philosophie des âges de la vie, Philosophy of the Stage of Life, I think. It's in French. I don't think it's translated by two professors of philosophy, and I says, well, this is wonderful because they will give me some broad definition of the theme that I want to treat. And with adulthood in particular, there's a whole chapter where it says, well, it's easy. Adulthood is basically three things. An adult is somebody who has experience, and it's somebody who is responsible, not only of, he can be, let's say, responsible of what he says, what he does, but also of somebody else eventually. And finally, it's somebody who knows to be himself or to be herself, meaning that he has a certain authenticity. So I got my three concepts. I says, okay, maybe it's three parts of my lecture: experience, responsibility, and authenticity. But then I says, how the heck do we paint that, you know? How do you translate that in picture? And then, of course, it was too philosophical, I guess, too broad definition to really be applied. And I thought, okay, maybe the two of them, experience and responsibility, could be illustrated through the theme of work. When you work, you are habitually responsible, or you have a certain experience, otherwise you will not be able to do it, and you are responsible of what you do, at least, and you have certain relationship, let's say, with other people. And authenticity, of course, it's a chapter by itself, so we will treat it at the end as good as I can, but it's a completely different thing. And it's not sure that through your work, you find yourself. Some people do, but others have very different, let's say, personal values than what they can invest in their work. Their work is to make money or to make a living, but what they really like to do could be completely different. It's always fortunate when you can have both together, that you could find some, let's say, fulfillment in your own work, but it doesn't happen all the time. Okay. So, okay, if the theme could be how we represent work, then right away there's a big difference that we have to be made between what I would call rural work, work in a kind of agriculture type of surrounding, and industrial work, let's say work of more closer to what we know today. The first one is this kind of rural work. I think it's interesting if you think in terms of Canadian art, because it was a theme that was treated as such. And it's related to a certain conception of very traditional type of society, in which I would say the gist is that the relationship between individuals, between persons, is more important than the relationship with things. And in the rural concept, let's say, of work, you will see, and it's translated, of course, in picture too, that the relationship between the people is more valued than the relationship between things, of somebody with what he possessed, let's say. The relationship of friendship, of collaboration, or even of subordination is more important than the product, let's say, or your relationship with what you do as a thing, let's say. And in traditional society, of course, one of the most important relationships is hierarchical, where you have somebody who, for instance, who owns more land and could distribute it to many people. He is more powerful, and he's on the top of the I would say, the scale, the social scale. And you have one of the classical type of subordination, of course, in rural society, is between men and women. And guess where men are and where women are, it's easy. And so this you will see illustrated, or at least expressed, in works. And I thought of one good example of that is to, even if I have no relationship personally with him, it's with François-Marc Gagnon. We share the same name, but as you know, Gagnon is like Smith. I have a friend in Paris who says, "Oh, you are Canadian. Maybe you know my friend Smith in Winnipeg." I said, "No." It's a little bit. I think he saw the map of Canada big like this in his book, and he thought it was a small place. But anyway, and so Clarence Gagnon, as you know, made illustration for a famous novel by Aymon, who's called Maria Chapdelaine. And in these illustrations, you will see exactly what I mean by this type of expression of work as a kind of responsibility, but also as a kind of experience. So for instance, first image in which you see 3 generations of women. You have the grandmother in the background who is weaving, and so represent a certain skill. To do that, you need experience indeed, and to do it properly, you have to be responsible. You don't botch it, you don't do it in any way, and she knows how to do it, and she's close to the window very often. This is classical presentation. You have it also in Van Gogh, probably you may remember. And then Maria, the woman on the foreground, is kneading the flour, you see, to make bread. This is, again, it's a kind of typical type of knowledge of savoir-faire, if you want, that she has. And the third generation is also depicted by the little girl who is sleeping on her chair with her feet near a little crib, let's say, and she has a doll in her hand. So even her, I would say, announced a fourth generation in a way. She has already the maternal instinct, and you see these kind of hierarchy between all this generation of women, and also the fact that all the tasks there are domestic tasks. The tasks are done inside of the house and are for the purpose of, let's say, making carpets or making even vestment or clothes and things like that on one hand, and then on the other hand, making the bread, making what we have to eat. Clarence Gagnon is not representing women always inside of the house. He's interested also by outside, because I think he had a kind of almost mythological view of Quebec. You know that most of these pictures were done in Paris, in fact, from souvenirs. And that's why Hélène Sicot, who have made a wonderful catalog on Gagnon, speak of the land as dreamed by Gagnon, not as seen really by him, but as he dreamed of what it should be, or what it was, let's say. And so you have always this scene of the exterior scene in which you see now the grandmother making the next step after the kneading of the flour to make bread. You know, you cooked it in a kind of outside oven like this, a kind of baker oven. And she's on the foreground. Very often, Gagnon utilizes this type of device that's in composition where the foreground is rather dark a little bit, or in the shadow, if you want, and the background is very illuminated. So it creates always a kind of an aspiration. When you look at it, you are like attracted by the background. And indeed here the background is important because it makes a contrast between her work in the foreground and the rest of the community in the background. Because what is evoked there is, of course, the village. And indeed, there is a fence between her and the rest of the houses. It's not her house who's there, but it's the house of the people in the village. So again, you have this stress on a relationship between people more than with things. The fact that you belong to a community, to a village, is as important as the fact that you are, let's say, part of a family and part of maybe even a bigger community. You see what I meant by this two types of rapport. And it's interesting to compare this picture of Gagnon to another one who seems to be exactly on the same subject, but we'll see it's very different, in fact. This is done by Edmond J. Massicotte, who's not a great artist. I think I mentioned it already to you, maybe at another occasion. He's an illustrator, basically. But he treats here exactly the same subject matter at first sight, except that you see on the image on the left, there's no evocation whatsoever of the community. You just have the oven itself, the instrument, and maybe the gesture. It's almost, I would say, a quasi-ethnographic approach to the subject, as if he wanted to be very exact and to show you how these ovens were built and how. But the relationship of this person with the rest of the community is not even evoked. And when he does it a little bit more, on the right, on the image that you have there on the right side, the house who's there is not the house of the neighbors. It is the house of the woman who cooked the bread. You understand that she just go out of her own house and she make her little work and go back there. So again, you don't have this idea that you have in the Clarence Gagnon picture that this person belongs to a broader community and in which relationship with people are important, are valued. The other things that appear very often also in Clarence Gagnon picture, it is, again, definition of certain tasks who are different from this kind of craftsmanship knowledge, I would say, that we had before. To go to fetch water is not the specialty, it's not a craft, it's a task, something that you do. And again, it's a woman task, as he show it here. And again, in an exterior, because as I told you, he have this kind of beautiful vision of Quebec seen from far like this, or being very luminous, very illuminated, or eventually, even if it's gray like this, full of snow and white snow and things. What he have in mind all the time is the village of Baie-Saint-Paul near Quebec City, a little bit out of Quebec City, and where he lived for a while, and he's a river there also. Of course, he's like a local painter, very much praised in that region. But you see, now she's okay, working at a certain task. And another interesting aspect also is this famous fence that you see, this kind of snake fence that you see in the background. Because, again, there is a certain relationship to the land and to the, what you own in the land. But in traditional society, the rapport with the land is not only a rapport of property, it's something that corresponds to your need also. You have as much land as you need. If you have a big family, you need more land. And in the old system of seigneurial system, for instance, the seigneur, the landlord of all the ground there, could distribute to people according to their needs which piece of land they need. And then, of course, he got paid by goods or by money later. But there was a kind of an exchange there where needs of people were taken in consideration, where, if you want, it's more a question of distributive justice than just to own the land that you have work at. That the relationship with the land is not only work, but it's also eventually also answering to certain needs. So these fences who goes like this are also symbolical of this aspect of the society. Another feminine task, if you want, it is the picking of blueberries that you have here. She's there with her family. The man don't do much there. He just carry the harvest, whatever they have succeeded to gather. He's in the background. And they are, of course, in what we call in French a brûlé, a kind of a burnout area of the forest, because, as you know, the blueberries grows better when you have this kind of landscape, where there was forest fire or destruction of the trees like this. So again, this is a task in which the whole family contribute, let's say not only one person, but and gathering of picking all these berries from the ground and then having them transport at the house by the man in the background. You will see, again, in this, say when I speak of a kind of dream vision of the region, I think this is a good example of also the harvesting. You see there's a woman there who is binding the sheaves, I guess, at the foreground, but there is each one have his work, but each one is also in relation one with the other. Each one do a part of the work, and they have to be coordinated to do like this. And he situate that in a fantastic landscape in the back, probably a little bit of the Laurentide region, let's say Charlevoix, and it's exactly, again, this pays rêvé of what Hélène Sicot speak of, in which all this beauty is in his memory more than what he sees. Especially that this region, in terms of agriculture, is very hard because, first of all, you are in hills all the time. You have a lot of forests because you are in the north, and you have also a lot of rocks and things like that. So it's not so idyllic like it shows here. Here it shows like everything goes well under the beautiful sun and all that. But we know that Charlevoix is, maybe it was a paradise for painters, but it was not a paradise for people who lived there. It was a tough place to live and to pioneer in a way. And you see it maybe a little bit more here because, okay, it's plowing of a land who is, at the foreground, what you see, like stumps of trees, of course, who have been to be cleared before you could even sow anything there. And in the background, he put the famous Rivière du Gouffre, let's say, near Baie-Saint-Paul. You have this river that ends up in the St. Lawrence River, which is quite picturesque, and so he put it in the background. And then in the foreground, this man with his plow and attached with a kind of a bull and a horse that are, and then you see the rocks and all that. He suggests a little bit that it's not so easy, but the color is so beautiful and the atmosphere seems so serene and all that that you forget about the hardship of the work. And anyway, these big beasts are doing most of the work. He's just there behind, riding the plow. And again, this is another type of subordination, of course, between man and animals. That's why we call them domestic animals, because they are indeed controlled by the worker. It's a theme that Gagnon have already treated much before in 1903 when he was visiting Horatio Walker. You know that Horatio Walker was a painter from Ontario, but who lived in Ile d'Orléans, in the island of Orléans, for most of his career. And he had there a huge domain there, and he was treating subject matter like this a little bit in the style of the Barbizon school. And Walker was not so easy with the population, the local population. He wanted to have his ground, but he have good friendship with certain painters, including Clarence Gagnon, that could go there and discuss with him, and then finally do a work like this. And again, you see the tiny little personage in the back with his huge animal in front. This opposition, again, it's always the subordination, this big power of the animals is, in fact, in the hands of man. He is the one who directs them, who control them. Another activity in which you could say the relationship between people is very important also. It is this kind of drive of the logs on river, what in French they call la drave, which is probably just a transformation of the word drive. And you see in this picture, you have at least, as I count, at least 7 people. There's 2 in the foreground, and then 3 on one side, and two more. And so you have, again, a community there working together and having each one a very precise type of gesture to do. You have to be competent. It's dangerous also. You have to be fast and to do what to do, but you have to be coordinated also. And this, you will see the difference of let's say, of the philosophy behind this conception of the work that you have in Clarence Gagnon, if you compare the same subject matter treated by Holgate. Holgate here, he called it the lumberjack, but in fact, it's exactly the same thing. It's a man who is driving the logs that are behind him. But now he's alone, and he's not working really. He just holds this stick that he has in his hand. He's not really using it. And so we have a completely different conception of work here. The work that is suggested here is individualistic. It's somebody alone can do, and it doesn't it doesn't need to be coordinated with other people. And so this is the affirmation more of the individual against the community. And this is really typical of, let's say, of a more modern approach to work. That's what you will see, of course, in industrial work, more and more, this type of division of labor, where each person are on his own, and works bring money, bring salary, and that's it. So you have suddenly a rapport not between people, but between one individual and things. Here, things could be, let's say, his tool, but it could be also the logs who are behind him that he have to make float in the river and go away. So you understand, this is completely different conception of the same work. And indeed, when you look at this person, you have the impression that Holgate must have met somebody in particular, a real individual. Okay, create a type here, but it's based on a real individual, on an individual who is defined by his work and by a relationship between him and things, and not with other people. Yeah? And look, we can make another comparison of the same type. Here is Clarence Gagnon showing a trapper. Well, you will tell me, well, he is alone and he have nobody around and all this, but he have a dog to start with, who seems to be immersed in the snow there, the poor dog. And, but you notice that we don't see much of the face of the trapper in Clarence Gagnon's work. It could be anyone. It could be any trapper. And what is more important, it is what is the signification of his work for the community. Is the guy who get the fur that will be then used for coats and whatever. And this subject matter has been treated also by Holgate. And again, you will see the difference between both. Here, it's a kind of, on the left, it's kind of preparatory drawing, let's say, to the picture that you see on the right. So it's the same individual. We know his name. In this case, it's a man who was called Paul Dicker. And it's probably a Métis, in fact, half Indians, half French-Canadian. If you didn't know the title, you will not guess by looking at him that he's a trapper. Paul le Trappeur, this is not evident just in the picture. You could see maybe the only thing, the crucifix on the wall in the finished painting could suggest that he's a Catholic or maybe a French-Canadian, but even then, this is not very, very precise. So it's suddenly now, we are confronted not with somebody who works in the woods, like in the Clarence Gagnon things, but with an individual who is defined by itself, isolated from any community, and who is affirmed as with relationship with, maybe with things, with his crucifix. I don't know if there's one curator at the Musée du Québec, at the Museum des Beaux-Arts in Quebec City, who says that maybe the fact that he cut the crucifix in half, it is that he doesn't follow all the religion. Maybe it's going a little bit too far. I'm not sure of that. But no, I think it's more a kind of a clue to the fact that he's French-Canadian or he's Catholic or something like that, but not much more than that. But you see again the difference between the two approaches, where one work is defined through a relationship with people, with community, and the other, in fact, work is even not mentioned here at all. It's just the individual itself is affirmed. If we didn't have the title, we would not know what his work is. So again, you have, I would say Holgate represents a more modern approach to the subject, and Clarence Gagnon a more traditional one. You have really two worlds there, very, very different. Then the other type of work I wanted to speak of is the more, I would say, the work of workers of today, in an industrial context. And paradoxically, one of the first who have treated that is Ozias Leduc. Here you will see it's something else, but anyway, I will give you the context of this picture, and then we will go on. Ozias Leduc had, at the end of his life, a huge contract of making decoration in a church in Shawinigan, in Shawinigan South. And the church is called Notre-Dame de la Présentation. It's not a very beautiful church, rather, but big, like many churches of that period. And he had walls and walls to cover, and I think this is really his last work. Of Monsieur Le Duc was then rather old, and he worked on this for many, many years. And on each side of the church, let's say on the main aisle there, you have 4 panels that he painted. And 2 of them are devoted to, I would say, more traditional type of theme, like what you see here, the kind of clearing of the woods and the sowing of the land and things like that. But 2 others are devoted to, I would say, industrial work typical of the region of Shawinigan. One is about the paper, the fabrication of paper, and the other about the exploitation of aluminum. And this is, of course, quite new, because then you introduce a kind of contrast between this type of more classical type of work that you show here and a different type of work, of course, who's more modern, more industrial. So the first depiction is this kind of the clearing of the land with showing the settlers, you see, coming, cutting woods. One in the back is measuring the wood, and the 2 in front are using a kind of 2-handled saw, you know, to cut the trees. The man in the middle, I don't know if I can show you, have rather a long arm, and I think it shows more the swing than the real anatomy of this man. And the type of costume we have there is not exactly the one that you expect from a lumberjack. I think that I see Monsieur Le Duc, you see, in his very refined man and all that, so he's dealing with the subject matter maybe that he knows, but a little bit from far. And where he triumphs is more in the top there, because he was always very excited by symbolism. And so what he did there is to accumulate a series of instruments. It's hard for me to point them one by one, but let's say you have a yoke, for instance, and you have this instrument here that we call a cantouk. And that was funny when I found that it's an English word, because in my childhood we used to call it un cantouk. Un cantouk, ça c'est du joual pur, it's a pure French-Canadian word, you know, that, but it's English, of course. It can't hook. It's a hook to be able to roll the logs of wood. And so you have that. You have a pickaxe also. And so a few instruments like this are on the left. In the middle is a plow, of course. And in the right, you have, again, an instrument that can be used for agriculture. Let's say, like, for instance, a sieve, and also harrow, things that could be used for tilling the earth, in fact. So as if what he shows there on the top is what will follow what we see here in the foreground. As if symbolically, what he shows on the top is a little bit what will happen after. And then it's interesting because he makes a kind of difference between, I would say, instruments, like a yoke and things like that, are not really tools, and tools also, like the axe, for instance. This is a tool. Then we begin to be more precise about all these things. Like also the distinction between a thing and a product. A thing is something that you have, a product is something that you use. So all this becomes to be more clear and more defined, because in fact we are dealing now with more modern type of work than before. The other theme, this idea of tilling the ground and all that was also, you could see in another picture of Ozias Le Duc of a previous period of 1901, where you see in the background is the Richelieu River, of course, and then the plain of Montreal, as it's called, and then this big field. In the sketch preparatory to that, the horses are bigger. So by reducing them in size, it gave even more space to this land in the foreground. It's a subject matter that interested him since a long time. So when he was dealing with decoration of the church, it was more or less present to him. The second panel in the church of Notre-Dame de la Présentation always is the sower. But then is again a classic type of theme in which there's one little problem with this guy here. Doesn't seem in the right proportion in comparison with the middle one. but he's digging something, so who cares? And then in the foreground, you have a man who's eating his lunch in the middle of the day. And again, this interest in symbolism on the top there, where you see in succession, let's say, the wheat, of course, a sheaf of wheat, and the chalice and the host. Okay, so then he's in a church, so it makes sense. And then the grapes of wine, the opposition between wine and bread, and of course the body and the blood of Christ. This is I would say this is a very, very classical type of iconography for that theme. But then when it becomes more interesting in terms of more new, if you want, it's when he starts to, in two other panels, to treat now the works, the industrial type of work, and not the work of rural area, but of industry. And the first one, of course, is devoted to the preparation of pulp to making paper. So what you see, these people are putting logs of wood in a kind of grinding mill that will reduce it in shreds like this, and finally we make pulp, and with this pulp you will be able to make paper. And you see on the right a kind of a sketch that he made before, in which he indicates exactly the subject matter. If you read this on the top there, he says le bois, so the wood, and then he says the fact that you put this wood in a mill to grind it, and les meules dont il parle is a grinding mill, in fact. And on the other side, this is more surprising, there is a kind of quotation from the Bible in Latin. It's in principium erat verbum. This is the beginning of St. John Gospel. The first word, at the beginning the word was, and you know this text. So that means that the book which is there on the top there is probably the Bible. Since in the sketch he wanted to put a phrase like that, and what he suggests here, okay, this is very nice to make paper, but the real signification of paper in the church is to make a Bible. And the ray, of course, comes from the Bible. On one side, he put, I think, a kind of, I don't know if I pronounce it well in English, papyrus, this kind of plants that the Egyptians used to make paper. How do you say that? Papyri? Or? Oh, okay, so you know what I mean. It's perfect. And on the other side, you have a printing press. So that makes sense. Apparently, when you look with binocular, because it's quite high and it's difficult to look at, the text in the Bible there is not the one that he wanted to put. It's something else. It's the beginning of the Genesis. God created man and woman at his image and things like that. It's the chapter 2 of Genesis. So maybe he changed his mind, but apparently he wrote the text there that you could read with binocular, because it's quite a big decoration in the church. It's not so easy to look at. And you see also that more or less the drawing is very close to the finished work. You see, as if he really have planned it carefully. And very often he have also what we call this mise au carreau. That means a kind of grid in which you can, even on a little sheet of paper like this, you can enlarge it after in a big panel by repeating the grid, but with a different scale. So that's a technique, of course, that was used not only by Leduc, but by old tradition of painter that paint murals and paint frescoes and things like that. You need very often to this grid system to pass from one size to the other. The other depiction is devoted to aluminum, to the metal workers this time. And I didn't stress it, but again, the relationship of these people is with things. Like the people in the paper mill before, they are dealing with wood and with machine, and with, they are dealing with things, not with people. And here again, it's the same thing. Each worker that has his specialty. Some are smelter, others are molder, and each one have, and it's quite dramatic. You know, you have to be fast and you have to do it properly at the right time and all that. Each one is concentrated in his thing, and again, in the top, Leduc tried to associate now metal work with something. So he put a lira here, a kind of lamp there with alpha and omega, because of the quotation of the book of Revelation, in which it says, God says, I'm the alpha and the omega. And finally here, which is more difficult to interpret, an anvil. You know that we have now, with internet, beautiful tools to find words in the Bible. I says, maybe I would put anvil there and I will see what it is. And there's one mention of anvil in the whole Bible, and it's about the construction of idols. So it's very negative, meaning that an idol is just something that you beat on an anvil and then you fix on the ground that it will not shake and all that. Say the prophet making joke about idols, saying that this is not serious. So it's certainly not the meaning of that here, of the anvil. My good friend and colleague Laurier Lacroix says maybe there's an association with the three senses. The lira will refer to the hearing, of course, and the lamp to the sight. And he says the anvil, I says, what do you make with the anvil? Well, you see, it cannot be odor, smell, it cannot be taste, so it must be touch. But this is not completely convincing. I think we have the key if you compare to the previous things. The anvil is the tool that you use to make the things, like the printing press is the tool that you use to make a book. Here, to make a lamp or to make a lira in metal, you need the anvil. So that's, I think, more what is suggested here. But anyway, unfortunately, on the drawings, we don't have any clue written by Leduc that could orient this interpretation. In the previous one we had, he wrote on it what he meant. Here you have just, and if you compare the drawings with the finished picture, you will see there's a lot of differences, as if he had hesitated more. This is, of course, a craft that he had no idea about before. And we know that he met some workers, like this Monsieur Nadeau here, saying, could you be in the costume that you use to work and show me the gesture you do and all that? And from that, he made some drawings of this personage, but many details he skipped. He could not understand, for instance, this big belt that they have around them, of course, because it's so hot, and you have to protect yourself against the heat there. So he didn't understand that, and if you go back to the picture, you see, again, they are dressed like with little hats and regular coat and all that. But the difference also between the sketch and the finished drawing shows that it was not so easy for him to understand all that. But the importance, I think, of this picture, it is to make the transition between the two worlds, between, let's say, the traditional conception of work and our more modern one, in which to the relationship between person are substitute now the relationship between person and things. And this, of course, is a completely different point of view. You will see more of that when we will go to now, let's see, even closer to us type of representation of work. This is a work by Louis Moulstock, who is, as you know, a kind of an important painter of the Depression time in particular. And it represents a welder in the Canada Vickers at the time. So in 1943, of course, you are in the middle of the war. And these workers are working for building ships that will be sent to war, in fact. They are really part of the war effort. And what happened now, you have a kind of, I would say, a division of labor. Each one is very specialized in one thing. Like this welder knows how to put rivet, let's say, on a big piece of metal, and this is what he is done for. And because of the division of labor, and because of the lack of contact with other people. They are alone there. He's on a scaffold, like the title indicates, and he's quite high and isolated like that. You could speak of a certain depersonalization of the worker. I become like more like almost a machine. If you could replace him by a machine. And this depersonalization is symbolized a little bit here by the mask he's obliged to wear. And Woolstock have told a story that this worker says to him, it was very nice that you paint us, but how our people will recognize us with this picture? You know, how they will know it's me, yeah? And not somebody else, because it's completely impersonal. So Woolstock discovered a good solution for the problem. He says, oh, I see on your lunchbox you have a number there, 644. Yeah, he says, it's only me. So he says, okay, I will put your number on the painting, and your wife will know that it's you and not somebody else. This is a typical Woolstock touch, of course, of a sweetness like this, that he could find a solution like that. And he will do it quite systematically. Sometimes, during a break, for instance, he had the chance to ask the worker to lift his mask and could make a portrait of him. And here again, he gave his name, W. Fredette, is a French-Canadian name, and the number, 1943. 16587 is the number, 1943 is the date, of course. And again, he gave the number of this worker, let's see, but there he didn't really need it, but since he did it for the other one, everybody wanted to have it. Here, in the contrary, you have a certain contact with the face of the guy, which is quite profound in a way. It's not an easy portrait. You feel certain intensity in this man, a certain fatigue also, a kind of inner space also quite strong. And he's not looking outside, he's not looking at a painter, he's more preoccupied by something personal. So it gave a lot of density to, and what is wonderful is that Woolstock could do that quite fast, because this break, of course, was very short. The foreman didn't like painters stopping workers, let's say, to make their portrait. You are not there for that. He got, Woolstock and Brantner and others got the permission from the vicars, because they were presented as kind of artists who could make eventually poster against the war, against not the war, against the Nazism, against Germany. And so because of that, they were tolerated in the factory, but tolerated, and they were not supposed to interrupt endlessly the work of these people. Then, in another context, in 1939, just before the war, Woolstock have also treated a completely different subject, the one of unemployment. And this is, again, he knows the name of the guy. It's two portraits of him, William O'Brien, unemployed. This, of course, there's a long period of very difficult, if you want, between let's say, the crash of 1929 up to the war. In fact, there was a lot of unemployed people and a lot of difficulty in the working class. And Woolstock here have understood one thing. If you define yourself as a worker, as an individual, and suddenly you lose this work because suddenly you are unemployed, one of the consequences of this, you feel that in the system in which you are, in this kind of wild capitalism of the time, you are a disposable in a way. You could be exchanged for another one, and you could be also disposed of. And then what is attacked there is a kind of human dignity, because you are suddenly like a thing in a way that could be used, but if for any reason we cannot pay you or we cannot use you anymore, you just left there. And I think it's what he wants to express in the kind of very refined but a little bit desperate face of this man. This kind of, it's not so much that he have lost his salary, have lost his work and all that, but he also have been touch, it is dignity. And here, if you permit me, just a little parenthesis about Karl Marx. Marx make a difference between what he called use value and exchange value. I'll try to explain it as clear as I can. Use value, it is the value of any object, let's say an apple, for instance, that is underline the fact that it could be useful. For instance, an apple could be eaten and could nourish you. So this is the use value of an object. The exchange value of an object, it is what you can get for it if you sell it, or what you have to pay for it if you want to buy it. So the same apple now suddenly, in exchange value, is not something that nourishes you, something that could bring you $1, let's say, or would cost you $1. In one case, you have a relationship with something concrete, the apple that you eat. In the other, it's more abstract, because the apple is transformed in money, and with this money, you can buy anything else, let's say matches, and will have nothing to do with apple. So it becomes, the exchange value derealize, if you want, the product. It becomes just money. It's like an equivalent of money. If the apple is rotten, of course, you cannot have any money for it, so you throw it. If you transpose these two concepts with people, like we have here, I think, okay, the use value of a worker will be almost acceptable in a way. That means it will underline his knowledge, even his physical strength. It could underline his intelligence. But the exchange value of a worker, this is terrible, because that means it could be replaced by anybody else. And this is what happens, of course, when you have this chain work, in which each one is asked just to make a little gesture. So it's not important that it's you or me who does it. Anybody can do it. And if ever, for any economic reason, suddenly you have to put people out of the system and to put them on unemployed, it's a little bit like my example of the rotten apple, that you cannot get anything in exchange for it. And this is why I think that what Mulstock expressed here, it is this lack of dignity. This suddenly the realization that I'm just an exchange, my value is just an exchange value. You know, I'm not really a person there. I'm not really somebody. I'm just one token in a big chain that I could be replaced, and I could be even disposed of. And I think that's the level where Mulstock went with these representation. To compare it, to show you a kind of different approach, I will show you two others, painters who have treated the same subject. One is Rita Briansky, and the other is Ernst Newman. Again, depicting unemployed people. You notice that we don't have their name there. Mulstock have a personal relationship with his model. He asks their name, who you are, what happened to you, and then they create a kind of rapport like this. Here, you don't have it. Here, I think we go from ontology to psychology. Before, really, what it's all about is a kind of human dignity. Here, it's more all the anguish and the revolt, eventually, that unemployment create. It's true that chômage in French comes from coma in Greek, that means burn, to be burned. And there is a stigma, of course, to be unemployed. And this, I think, more what Briansky or Newman tried to express, this more, I would say, psychological type of level. We are not at the same type of death, I think, with a Mulstock picture. Anyway, maybe it's a little bit far-fetched when I advance, but I think there is a difference that you can feel, especially in the man on the left, the picture of Briansky. You feel his anxiety, you feel maybe his revolt also, but we are at the level where work is valued as such, and to lose work is to lose identity in a way. Because you don't have work, you are nobody. You are like an invalid, if you want. You are put aside, and so you could be revolted by it, or you could be very anxious. Also, what will happen of me? So I think these, and in the Ernst Newman work, then he seems just to smoke and to wait, and not to be nor anxious nor to worry by his situation. And it is called unemployed number 7, so it's just like a more aesthetic type of approach to the subject matter, without this empathy or the sympathy that you have in the Mulstock picture. Anyway, so another painter who will deal with work in a kind of an interesting way, it's Fritz Brandner. You know that Brandner was German in origin, and he went through the First World War in 1914-18, and on the Germany side, of course, and become so disgusted with war, he became a staunch pacifist after, never wanted to be mixed with anything of that kind. Immigrate in Canada in the 30s, first established himself in Winnipeg and finally in Montreal. And Brandner, like Mulstock, got the permission also to go on the premises of big industry, let's say, and was inspired by what he saw. He was quite a socialist also in terms of ideology, so for him that was a good team to treat. So like here, the factory workers, you see, it's exactly what I was describing before, this kind of division of labor, of each one having a little gesture to do, and these two women are separated, let's say, by a middle line. They don't communicate between themselves, and they have to work to repeat the same gesture endlessly to make all these, I don't know, button, or I don't know what they are fabricating, but again, he felt that aspect. Here, in this drawing, where he shows workers around a kind of huge power hammer, and what they hold is something, it's iron burn, very hot. That's why it's red in the middle. And I think because he's attracted by abstraction, Brandner will become an abstract painter. I think he felt a little bit this, what I was mentioning before, this kind of alienation of the worker. The fact that he become abstract. They don't have any more personality, you know, or individuality. They become just exchangeable good. And so the fact that he have a cubistic type of language here could fit with that, or could fit with this kind of depersonalization, let's say, of the worker. You see them, but they are mixed with the background. They are difficult to detach from the background. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about my two first themes, responsibility and experience, okay, as expressed in two types of work, rural and industrial. Now, third problem, authenticity. How do you show that? The problem with this theme is, of course, it's too broad. Anything could be, any portrait could do. Any portrait to show certain personality could do. So that's why I think it's not a good theme to treat in terms of a course like that. It's too broad a category. We are not. So I thought, okay, I will take 3 examples to show a little bit where it can go. Habitually, what we try to find, of course, when you think of authenticity, is somebody that will have strong personality. And here it's a portrait of Dr. Dumas by John Lyman. I'm not sure that I would like him to be my doctor. He seems quite tough and severe. And, but anyway, he was a wonderful man. He was very close to Lyman. He was, in particular, a secretary of the Contemporary Art Society for many, many years. He also wrote about art in a medical journal that he had access to. He was a collector. His collection has been, unfortunately, dispersed after his death recently. So he's certainly somebody close to the art world. And that's not astonishing that Lyman decided to make a portrait of him. And what he shows, of course, is somebody with some power, some authority also. He's turning toward us. He has this little bow tie. You see that gave us exactly his situation in space. And looking, not being shy and not looking on the side and all that, looking at you directly or at the painter directly. And you could say, well, this is a man who knows to live with oneself, who is authentic in that sense. He has nothing to hide, and he's very affirmative, let's say. Yeah. Another example of the same type of thing is this picture by Lauren Harris of a pastor, of which he have a lot of admiration to, is Dr. Salem Bland. And this was a Protestant pastor with, I think, associated first with the Methodist Church, and who got involved more and more in social issue. And this is easy to understand because you do have, after, let's say, the war, the First World War, and especially after the revolution in Russia, a kind of new awareness of social issue in everywhere. And Christian, of course, wanted also to not to be left over from that. And Bland is a typical pastor who got involved in so-called social problems and defended many ideas like, let's say, to reduce the number of days of work in the week, to save the Shabbat especially, and then to reduce the number of hours also for each day at 8 instead of 18 or 16 or the crazy type of schedule that they have before. It was for syndicalization of workers. It was also for nationalization of certain industry. It was to tax luxury instead of tax normal goods, things like that. He has a lot of ideas of that kind. He speaks even of replacing the capitalism regime by a cooperative regime. Almost a revolutionary type of discourse, except he never used the word revolution because it's associated with violence, and he is distant that. He was also working for, I would say, a certain ecumenism inside of the Protestant churches of Canada, and he was one of the one who fostered, let's say, the United Church of Canada. After being a Methodist, now he passed through this United Church. And Harris have a lot of admiration for him, share many of his ideas, and decided to make this very forceful type of portrait of an authentic individual, if you want. And this will give us a clue to the last picture I want to show you, which is an abstraction by the same Lawrence Harris. You know that at the end of his career, he shifted from figuration to abstraction. And this one he called also in bracket involvement. And this is interesting because involvement means, of course, to be involved in, particularly in social issues. So it makes sense with what we saw before. But at first, when you look at it, you don't see much of what is the relation between the title and what we see there. We have of this picture few preparatory drawings, like you see 3 of them here, in which nothing much change in each one. You see always the same type of odd shape with circles and all that, and then finally at the bottom always the 3 circles, and the first one is with a grid, and finally you simplified it, and we go back to this final product if you want. But if you bear with me a little bit and you try to see, if you read this big curve, this one, as a forehead, this as an eye, and this like a chin, you will see it's almost a self-portrait of Harris. Okay, I make my demonstration. This is Harris' photo, the same forehead, the same intense look, and the chin, the little pointed chin. And what it is, in fact, it is a kind of a self-portrait of him being involved. So in bracket, it says involvement. Being involved in, of course, in his own world. You see, he was interested in theosophy. He was interested in making a new Canadian art different from the past and all that. But I think we have a kind of maybe a little bit narcissistic type of picture of him here. See, like when you see it, or am I the only one to see it? No, I hope not. And that you see a kind of profile there of him, and because the other interpretation I've read of this, it's a wonderful man who was Dennis Reed, who is the curator at the AGO, at the Art Gallery of Ontario. You see it as a plant, as a kind of flower coming from the ground and getting, say, open like this. And okay, maybe, but I think it's more personal than that. And you could not call the picture involvement if it was just a representation of a fulfilling of a plant. So again, you see, this theme of authenticity is difficult in a way because it's too broad. I think this is the problem with that. It is, any portrait could do anyway, and any portrait, especially of special people, could do, and we could go on and on like this. I think the other theme that we deal with work is more targeted, is more interesting in a way for this way to express adulthood. There will be many other ways, but this is one way. Okay, we'll finish with that. I repeat that next week I don't give a lecture because there is a Friends of the Museum things, but we will see each other on the 4th of June if you want. We will continue with a theme that begins to bug me a little bit, old age in men. Okay, thank you.